I'm Juno, and thanks for, again, being here this morning as we continue in this series called The Emotionally Healthy Church. And this week I had the experience, probably the first time in, I think, 20 years, that I've had to buy diapers. Now, not adult diapers for me, but for a shower I'm going to. And I don't know about you folks, but if you haven't bought diapers lately, it's like you need a degree on how to figure these things out. It's like I'm shopping, I'm going, that seems very cheap for diapers. Well, then I realized it's a whole aisle of baby wipes. You know, it's like, what's wrong with just one container? Baby wipes, here you go. But I almost bought them hundreds of baby wipes, which maybe they'll need, but they were really looking for some diapers. And so the wrapping's confusing. It's a very frustrating. I almost had to call a few people, call a friend to say, what in the world? Just tell me what to buy. FaceTime it, tell me when to stop because those are the ones I'll buy. Now, what does that have to do with this sermon? Not a whole lot, except it really did put me in the world. It took me back into the world of those who have babies. Something that, for a guy like me, it's easy to forget about. It's easy to forget not only the cost of those things, but just trying to figure out what's best for this child that you love deeply. And so I got him some diapers and a receipt, and if it's the wrong thing, they can just take it back. But again, we are talking about the emotionally healthy church, and this week we will be talking about entering into the life of other people. And while we as a church walked through this series about 6 or 7 years ago, we felt it was just right for us to re-enter that again. And if you've read the book along with us, you'll read in there where it says this is probably, and even as I've talked to other pastors who have done this, some friends, it's probably a subject that we need to re-engage with every year. Not that we'll do that collectively, but really on your own time. It is probably just a very healthy thing to be intentional about what's going on in our lives emotionally so that we could respond appropriately to being the church. And we do this. We do this because our emotional life definitely impacts our spiritual life. And we've read this in the book over and over when the author says, it's not possible for a Christian to be spiritually mature while remaining emotionally immature. And again, for years and probably for decades, many people, churches included, would often separate our emotional life from our spiritual life and think the two never come together. And in reality, God has created us with emotions, and they really do impact us spiritually. Let me pray. Again, Lord, for your presence here, I thank you. For the people here who got it together enough to be here, thank you. To our guests who may be just checking you out, Lord, and trying to figure out what faith is and where their faith is at, thank you. And I am extremely grateful that you are a God that does not ask us to check our experiences or our emotions at the door of this place, but that you invite us to bring them here in front of you. And so I simply pray, Lord, that the thoughts that may be going on in each of the hearts here this morning, and that the words that come from my mouth will be acceptable in your sight, because you are our strength and our Redeemer. And God's people said, again, people, I think that the more we are emotionally healthy, the more we can love the world and love them well, like Jesus has told us to do. Again, that's the bottom line here. That's the spoiler alert that we will be talking about this morning, where we are headed toward the idea of loving others. And so that doesn't give you an excuse to leave early. You can practice some emotional health by sticking around till the end and seeing what God may have just in store for you. But really, that's where we are headed. And the reason why emotional health is deeper than just living a good life. It's deeper than just, and more important than just living a happy life. A balanced life, a productive life. Living an emotionally healthy life is key to us to live out what Jesus tells us in the book of John. It's one of his last statements, and it's in John, page 751, John 13:34 through 35. We have mentioned this verse several times over the years, but it is critical, and it's the reason why we feel it's important for us to look into our emotional health. And it's simply this: a new command I give you, love one another as I have loved you, so you must love one another. By this, everyone will know that you are my disciples if you love one another. People, again, that verse, if you go back to the beginning, a new command I give you to love one another, it would have been so easy to stop it right there. Because then we all could have had our own interpretation of what does it mean to love one another. But no, Jesus continues that and says, as I have loved you. And I think that's where the challenge is. And that's where, to be an emotionally healthy person, we can love a whole lot better as Jesus has loved us. Again, the results, the bottom line for being emotionally healthy really does pave the way. It provides the foundation. It really sets the course for what we read in Philippians and for really how we should live our lives. And so I'm going to read for you the beginning of Philippians 2, verses 1 through 11. And it's also on page 819 in the Bibles in your chairs. Feel free to take that if you don't have one. But again, let me just set this up. This is, again, written by Paul. And I think many of us know Paul. Well, not personally, but we know of Paul. He's the guy that lived most of his life far from Jesus. He was imprisoned when he wrote this letter. He was a guy that killed people for believing in Jesus, and yet somehow, some way, the Spirit of God touched his life, transformed him, and used him to write most of the New Testament. So that's the guy who's writing these words. And as we begin chapter 2, he starts with a few rhetorical statements, meaning basically they're questions, but they're really a fact. And so let me just begin that for you. Philippians 2, verse 1. Therefore, if any of you have any encouragement from being united with Christ. So really he is saying, you know what? You are united with Christ. If any comfort from his love, we have comfort from his love. If any common sharing in the Spirit, we have common sharing in the Spirit. If any tenderness and compassion, folks, that's because of Jesus. We have that tenderness and compassion. And then he continues, then make my joy complete by being like-minded. This is when he tells us to enter the world of other people, having the same love, being one in spirit and of one mind. Do nothing out of selfish ambition or vain conceit. Rather, in humility, value others above yourselves. Not looking to your own interests, but each of you to the interest of others. In your relationships with one another, have the same mindset as Christ Jesus, who being in the very nature God, did not consider equality with God something to be used to his own advantage. Rather, he made himself nothing by taking the very nature of a servant, being made in human likeness. And being found in appearance as a man, he humbled himself by becoming obedient to death, even death on a cross. Therefore, God exalted him to the highest place and gave him the name that is above every name, that at the name of Jesus every knee should bow in heaven and on earth and under the earth, and every tongue acknowledge that Jesus Christ is Lord, to the glory of God the Father. These are some wonderful words from Paul, from a guy that wasn't sure if he was going to live to the next day or not. But they are wonderful words because they remind us again, he challenges us again to be living the life that Jesus tells us to live. And again, and why do we do this? Why is Paul saying, you know what, take on these, live in the life, live in other people's worlds? It's because, as we talked about earlier, a new commandment I give to you, to love one another. That's how we are to love one another, as Jesus did, as we enter into their world. Again, as we think through what Paul is addressing in that passage in Philippians, he is trying to smooth things over with the early church. And he is reminding the early church, because sometimes we think the early church was perfect. He is reminding them it is time to get it together, to get focused, and to be on mission. This doesn't mean that the church is made up of all clones, that everybody has to dress the same way, act the same way, speak the same way, all have the same gifts. That's not what Paul is saying. He is simply saying that we need to be on mission to love one another as Christ has loved the church. And in that process, we will disagree. And that's okay. That is normal. That's a part of life. And in fact, at times, it's really needed, and it is really healthy that we disagree. And yet, because of past situations, and we've talked about the iceberg, that our life is an iceberg, and that because of past situations, underneath the surface, some of us have buried some things under the surface that say, when we disagree, that means we don't care about each other. That means I don't love you because I disagree. That means we are going to have one heck of a fight because we disagree. And again, I'm not sure what put that under that iceberg for you. And it really depends on your upbringing. It does. It depends on your upbringing, your experiences, your spouse, your parents. But to disagree is simply to disagree. And that's okay, to disagree. But in most situations in life, the disagreement isn't the issue. It's really how you respond to others when you disagree. And so as we read what Paul is saying, be of like mind and everything, let's remember that we're not, thank the Lord, we are not all the same people. Thank the Lord that we have different gifts, different talents, different preferences on how we live our lives and what we do. Because life would be pretty boring if we were all the same. And so our question remains, again, so how do we love well? How do we love as Jesus wants us to love? Because really, love can be pretty subjective if you think about it. Depending on the age, depending on the person, how do you love well? Well, again, Paul tells us in Philippians chapter 2, verses 2 through 4, he unpacks that. Again, the same mind in one spirit, that we love one another as I have loved you. And again, this is huge for us because I think it's easy for us to sort of ignore it, to sort of assume it. In fact, I'm sure some of us have prayed before, prayers like, Lord, help my neighbor. They need to see your love. Lord, be with my coworker. He needs to experience your love. Be with my kids, Lord, that they know what your grace is all about. And those are good prayers. There's nothing wrong with those. But the way God answers those, most of the time, God answers those prayers by you. You are the one that is going to show God's love. We are the people that are going to show God's grace. When I say we, I'm not referring to me as who oversees the church office. The church office doesn't show you love. That's kind of a cold, sterile thing. No, God's people. We, as God's people, show his love, show his grace. And we do that because he's given us the power. He's forgiven us. He has given us his grace. And we just need to live that out. And I think sometimes it really comes back to being present. It comes back to being involved with some other people's lives. It goes back to, some of us are old enough to know the song, what the world needs now is love, sweet love. Probably we all remember Diana Warwick singing it, but she didn't write it. She definitely helped make it popular. What the world needs now is love, sweet love. It's the only thing that there's just too little of. And everybody needs God's love. Now, when I hear that, I'm not sure, it was Jackie DeSwana wrote the song. I'm not sure what kind of love she was talking about. But when I hear that, I just automatically put in what the world needs now is the love of Jesus. And that it's not just for everyone. And we know that. We know that because John 3:16, that for God so loved the world. But the world does need the love of Jesus. Everybody does. And so I can sing that song and hum that song. And in my mind, it's really a song about being on mission. And really, that's what we need. That's what your neighbors need. That's what your children need. That's what your spouse needs. That's what your relatives need. And again, as we approach the holidays, all of your relatives, even some of those you don't want to come into your home, they may even have the love of Jesus. They need a whole lot of other things, probably, in addition to that. But again, people, we just need to be able to show that love, but it's the love as Jesus did, and that is just a very much more difficult way to love other people. And so this is going to be, again, a little bit of a practicum, so to speak, or some practical stuff. I think if we go back and listen to that old saying that some of you have used, maybe with your spouse or with your kids, that God gave us 2 ears and 1 mouth. Because God wants us to listen more than talk. And again, that is easier said than done, especially when you're in the middle of a heated argument. But we need to listen. And it's just plain difficult to listen and to hear the story behind the person in front of us. Let's journey back with me to 1963. Some of you weren't even born. Zach, when were you born? 90? Okay, that's well before your time there. Okay, anyway, some of you weren't even born. Most of us were. But let's go back to a city in Birmingham, where the schools, Birmingham, Alabama, where the schools, the restrooms, the parks, the drinking fountains, and the buses were racially segregated by law. That seems absolutely horrendous to me, but yet it happened in 1963. The Reverend Martin Luther King Jr. arrived on the scene for a peaceful demonstration that he was going to have against racial injustice. And the sheriff took out a court injunction that made that march illegal, while Martin Luther King went ahead with that march and he was taken to jail. 8 pastors and a rabbi. That almost sounds like a joke. 8 pastors and a rabbi went into a bar. No, that's not where I'm going with this. But 8 pastors and a rabbi, who I am guessing have never had a conversation with Martin Luther King Jr., let alone a person of color. He was arrested, and these folks sent him a letter saying, "Why didn't you just wait? Why weren't you more patient?" So Martin Luther King wrote a letter, a response back that's become known in American literature as the letter from a Birmingham jail. Let me read that to you. I guess it is easy for those who have never felt the stinging darts of segregation to say, wait. But when you have seen vicious mobs lynch your brothers and fathers at will and drown your sisters and brothers at whim, when you see the hate-filled policemen curse, kick, brutalize, and even kill your black brothers and sisters with impunity, when you see the vast majority of your 20 million Negro brothers smothering in an airtight cage of poverty in the midst of an affluent society, when you suddenly find your tongue twisted and your speech stammering as you seek to explain to your 6-year-old daughter why she can't go to the public amusement park that has just been advertised on television, and see tears dwelling in her little eyes when she is told that Funtown is closed to colored children, and you see the depressing clouds of inferiority begin in her little mental sky, and see her begin to distort her little personality by unconsciously developing a bitterness toward white people. When you take a cross-country drive and find it necessary to sleep night after night in the uncomfortable corners of your automobile because no motel will accept you. When you are humiliated day in and day out by nagging signs reading white men and colored. When your first name becomes nigger and your middle name becomes boy, however old you are. And when your wife and mother are never given the respected title Mrs. And when you are harried by day and haunted by night by the fact that you are a Negro living constantly at tiptoe since never quite knowing what to expect next, and plagued with the inner fears and outer resentments when you are forever fighting a degenerating sense of nobodiness. Then you will understand why we find it difficult to wait. Now, if that doesn't take you into the world of, even today, I know it's a loaded words. If that doesn't take you into the world of white privilege, into the world of horrific segregation and racism, I'm not sure what will. But just simply by listening, is listening by the gift of a letter that was written 55 years ago, that we are able to enter into another person's world. And this also goes in line with the old Native American statement that says, to truly understand other human beings, we must first walk a mile in their moccasins. The letter from a Birmingham jail reminds us that before we can understand or before we can love as Jesus wants us to love, that we must enter another person's life. We must become incarnational in our relationships, and we must really develop the art of listening. When Jesus entered our world, it was God becoming flesh, walking among us, entering our lives. And again, this letter from a Birmingham jail does remind us that we have got to enter the lives of other people before we can have the privilege and the honor of loving them as Jesus would want us to love them. Again, as I've reread this obviously several times, and even when I read it on my own, it brought tears to my eyes. And it's like, how could we? What went wrong? Even my guess is those pastors never talked to Martin Luther King Jr. or any other people that were different than them. And yet, without the ability to do that, the patience, the maturity, we are going to be unable to love as Paul told us to in Philippians chapter 2. It really takes somebody with emotional health to be able to listen, to be able to admit, yes, I messed up. Yes, I hear what you're saying. And so, as we continue to move forward and to be emotionally healthy, we will be able to see God use us more and more to be his disciples, and that others will know that he is God Almighty because of the love that we have expressed. And so we need to become, again, incarnational. And as we become incarnational, as we become more mature in our love and our own well-being, that means we've worked through and we're wrestling with many of the themes that we've talked about in the past. That we're consistently looking under the surface to figure out, why is that pushing my button? Why am I responding to a simple question this way? Why am I not going there for some reason? When we break the powers of our past, when we start to embrace our own limits to say, no, God made me for a purpose, and sometimes I need to say no. When we live in vulnerability and transparency, when we embrace grieving and loss, and it's when we mature in all those levels that we will really be able to honestly listen to people, the people that God brings into our lives as God would want us to. It's hard work. If you have not been listened to by your spouse, some of you want to say amen and elbow him or her. As a young child or as a student, as a college kid, how many of us as parents have just written off our kids for whatever reason and not have given them the respect to be listened to be there? Ronald Rolheiser tells us that there's this marvelous story about a 4-year-old girl who awoke one night frightened, convinced that in the darkness around her there were all kinds of spooks and monsters. Alone, she ran to her parents' bedroom. Her mother calmed her down and, taking her by the hand, led her back into her room. I would have just said, climb in bed, sweetie, we'll talk about it in the morning. But the mother was more mature than I, took her back into her room, put on the light, and reassured her with these words: you needn't be afraid. You are not alone here. God is in the room with you. The child replied, I know that God is here, but I need someone in this room who has skin on. And so how do we get skin on? How do we love well? How do we love in an incarnational way that really Jesus wants us to? And when we pray for our friends, our neighbors, our coworkers, our spouses, our kids, we really are praying that somehow, some way, that they will experience God with skin on. And again, most often than not, that is going to be through me and you, to be that skin for Jesus. And so that's going to happen when maybe a friend gets fired, when a tragedy strikes, when a marriage dissolves, when a marriage hits a rocky road, and they will hit rocky roads, even the best of marriages, when a death of a loved one happens, when our health goes downhill. I mean, there are all kinds of ways that you know yourself that you can be skin on by simply being there. And that's what the little girl needed. She was right theologically. She knew God was there, but she just needed somebody to be there. And so a key to being there really, again, folks, is to listen well. And I just personally feel that it is, listening is underrated, undervalued. We assume everybody knows how to listen, and in reality, it isn't happening. In reality, friendships are dissolving, marriages are falling apart, corporations split up, churches dissolve, churches split up, because people are just not listening. So listening screams in more than one way that you are present with somebody, and you really do want to understand, not that you agree with, but you want to understand their perspective. And so in the book and on the back, we do have a listening assessment, because it's like, okay, yeah, I know I need to listen. I know I suck at it. So what am I going to do about it? Yeah, my wife says I don't listen. My daughter says I don't listen. No, she did say to me this week, though, and good thing I was working on the sermon because I knew how to respond. She goes, now, Dad, I don't need you to problem solve. She tells me that often. I don't need you to problem solve. I don't need you to give me solutions. I just want you to listen. So I said, give me that guy's name. No, I didn't say that. But anyway, okay. So how do we, folks, again, I think this is it's just like prayer. We all say, yeah, we'll pray. Most of us don't pray. We forget how to pray. We forget to pray. Listening is the same way. We know we need to listen. And so again, there's this assessment in the book. It's only 15 questions. We've printed out for those of you who don't have the book or have computer access to get it. But it's a 15 question assessment. Very easy to answer. You don't even have to write anything out. All you have to do is circle the number. So that's easy. And I don't want to say for just the men. That's just easy. You don't need to write. Just think through it. I'm not going to read you the 15 questions. Here are a few of them. I do not presume to know what the other person is trying to communicate. And if you think this is you, circle it. Circle the number 1. Now again, for those, I was only married 20 years, and many of you have been married a whole lot longer than that. You think you know what the other person is going to say. I may think I know what my 24-year-old is going to say. But do I presume that I don't know what they're going to say, so I'm going to listen? Do my close friends, my close friends would say I listen more than I speak? And if you didn't really answer that one, ask them. I hope they would tell you. I am aware of how my family in which I was raised has influenced my present listening style. Ding, 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 that has everything to do with what we're talking about. That's probably why you've shoved a few things under that iceberg, because of how your family has responded to you listening. And again, you're not a bad person because your family maybe didn't listen to you, or you were always criticized, but it's just important to know that, that's why I'm afraid to say something, because whenever I've said it while growing up or married, I was ridiculed. I was condemned. I really wasn't listening to. So why should I say anything? So I'm just going to shove that under the iceberg. Anyway, again, folks, there's 15 questions. I'm not going to go through them all for you this morning. But you really want to stop and process that and think, okay, how well am I listening? And, okay, there's 15 questions. If you scored 12 or more that, yes, I'm doing this, then according to Peter, who wrote the book, it's outstanding. You're doing great. 4 or fewer, the ship is sinking. You are in trouble. So you need to tune into that. Again, if you don't, I've been in enough life groups to know that this is a fun thing to do with your life group, if you're close enough to them, to say, how would you rate me? And you just start to go through these, and they're throwing things at you. They're telling you, you are crazy. There's no way. And it's like, I had a blind side or 2 or 3 or 15. Whatever your score is. So it doesn't mean you're a horrible person. It doesn't mean there's no hope for you. It helps just give you a little bit more of a direction on what you need to be leaning into. David R. Alsberger is a guru on conflict management. And he says this: being heard is so close to being loved that for the average person, they are almost indistinguishable. Listening to and loving. For the average person, they put the two together. They cannot tell the difference. And I think we know, the average therapist is about $150 an hour. No, probably 50 minutes, because they need a 10-minute break before the next client. So $150 for 45 minutes. And most of them don't give you any answers. What do they say? So tell me how you feel. Why the tears? Explain the tears. Do you really think he said that? And it's just like, I'm paying you $150. You better tell me what to say, how to fix it, and get me out of here, buddy. I don't want to be here for the rest of my life. But just to know that, why do people do that? For many people, it's because they have nobody to listen to them. And I honestly believe, and we could give you umpteen statistics that'll say, the more you're in community here, not here at New Life, but the more you're in authentic, life-giving, biblical community, probably the less therapy that will be needed outside of that. Why? Because people need friends. They need to be listened to, and it's just not happening in our world today. And so there's a whole market. Now, again, I was sarcastic with, let me see how you're feeling with a therapist. There are definitely, if any of you are therapists, forgive me, there are definitely times when somebody who is very trained really needs to help guide you through some painful experiences in life, to help you look underneath that iceberg that you are so very fearful to even look, to look at some of those powers of your past that just bring tears to your eyes and raises your anxiety and puts you into a sweat, and you haven't even discussed them with anybody. A therapist can help guide you in a very healthy way through that. But again, to love well means we need to listen well. It means that we need to zero in and focus on the other person. And again, my daughter will often say when we're out to eat, I'll have my cell phone, and it'll make some noise. Okay, I'm not going to read this. It'll make some noise, and what she'll do is she'll just reach over and do this. She goes, "We're together, Dad. We're not together a lot, so you need to focus on me." I feel sorry for her husband. But anyway, no. And she's right. But the other side of the coin, folks, and for those of you who have kids, it's amazing how she has to go to the bathroom 4 times during dinner. And what does she do? She takes her little cell phone. Okay, but all that to say is an easy way to be present is to turn it off, to get rid of it for that mealtime. She has the attitude of, hey, the first one who looks at their phone picks up the tab. I go, sweetie, I'm going to pick up the tab anyway. So I'm just going to take my phone and start talking. No, but just that's a very simple way that, 20 years ago, it really wasn't an issue. But I think it's important for us, and I'm going to spend just a few more minutes on this, to look at what is called reflective listening. Some call it incarnational listening. Some call it fair fighting. And it is really the way to help let the other person know that you are listening, to work through some pretty touchy, explosive, potentially painful conversations. And so how do you do that and still keep a marriage? How do you do that and still keep a friendship going? And so the first tip to that is you need to set the stage. Meaning if you just hit the wall with them, you've exploded on something, that is not the time to say, let's talk. Because both of your emotions are just hitting the fan and nothing productive is going to come from that. So you may need to say, hey, let's talk about this tomorrow. For the culture today, let's not text about this. Let's meet. It could be that you're going to say, hey, let's just wait a couple hours and tonight let's pick this up. Or wait till I get home from work. let's pick this up in person. So you need to be proactive enough and at least self-aware enough to know that you are so ticked off that you are about to say something that you are going to need to go to confession about and to ask forgiveness about. And so the good news is that at least you're aware of it. So put the brakes on the discussion. Say, obviously, dear, whatever term you want to use, I've ticked you off enough. I've hurt you badly. Let's talk about this later. But again, I'm going to talk about it from two perspectives. One, the speaker, if you're the one talking. And so let's look at that first. So you're in this conversation, you've set the scene, and now you're going to talk. So here are just a few tips if you're the speaker. Okay? The first one is you use I statements rather than you statements. Meaning, I am upset. I made dinner and I feel insulted that you aren't here. So I am upset from this. I am angry when this happens. Versus, you tick me off, you this, you that, you this, because if anybody does that, who's not going to get defensive? So you just need to own it. I am frustrated. I feel angry. Secondly is keep it brief. This is not the time to tell your life story, because then minds are just going to naturally wander. But just keep it brief and stick to the one subject of what's occurred. Now, realistically, I know that's, again, so much of this is easier said than done. But let's not play the dump truck game, where for the last 2 years, since we were married, you've done this. And you've taken those little things that you thought didn't mean, and for us, it was the shower curtain and doilies. I'd admit, because I was in my 30s, my wife had just turned 30, and she was into that more French provincial decorations with all the doily stuff. And so we made a commitment that we would not just say, yes, dear, when she brought home a new shower curtain, or even the bedspread. You better throw that in there too. Because I just didn't want this to take my nice apartment, which I thought was decorated great, into this flowery, I'll just leave it at that, this thing. And so we had to make a promise, because we both grew up in households where the dump truck was normal. That nobody would say anything. Everything was A-okay until something triggered that dump truck, took it off balance, and boop, 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 whoosh, years of stuff came out of that dump truck. And so be careful that you address the things as they occur, and in this situation, stay focused. Because if that dump truck unloads, you really need somebody to help process that with you. So anyway, don't use a dump truck approach. Allow the other person to speak, even though I'm venting and I'm saying A, B, and C. I need to breathe. Give the other person some time to respond to that. I need to include my feelings, and I need to be honest and clear. I need to be direct and also respectful. To say, you've done this, which means you are blankety blank. You're just selfish, inconsiderate, whatever else you want to say, may have absolutely nothing to do with what he or she said or did. And so be respectful. And again, why are we saying this? Because if one of these days we are going to have things hooked up to our phones where I could say, okay, how many of you, and you can hit a thing and we're going to see it on the screen. But I would know most of us do not practice this type of listening in a very normal and healthy way, this reflective listening. And so I think it's just wrong for us to say you got to do it and send you out there and you be ill-equipped. And if we were to have a workshop on reflective listening, we'd get 6 people. My staff and a few others. And so I'm sharing this here. And now if you're the listener, if you're going from the speaker to the listener, You need to give the speaker your full attention. Again, I'll pick on the cell phone, even though I love the cell phone. It's a great communication tool. You need to put it away. Don't be tempted when it buzzes that all of a sudden you're sneaking a look at this, knowing somebody is bearing their heart to you about how they're feeling about something. Don't be thinking about, what am I going to say? What am I going to say? Just simply listen. And as believers, that's really where, okay, Lord, help me to listen, and you guide my remarks whenever it is appropriate. And we need to step into the speaker's shoes. And we learned that from the Martin Luther King letter from Birmingham. We need to step into their shoes to understand what in the world is going on. When I was 10 minutes late, did this set off a firestorm? Something's going on there. I need to avoid judging and interpreting. Whatever they're feeling, I just need to sit back, let them speak. Again, that's easier said than done. And I need to reflect. So you're saying that you don't like spending money on this type of a thing. You think this is a waste of money. I need to reflect back. Oh, so you don't like this type of a restaurant. I need to reflect back. Oh, I don't affirm you enough when you get a haircut. Or I don't notice you enough. Just reflect back, but don't interpret anything. Just shut up and reflect back. And it's going to, I think this reflecting back is the most awkward part of reflective listening. Because we feel weird. And I even made a joke of it when the therapist would say, so you're feeling a little upset, but really that's what we need to do. So tell me, I'm hearing this, I sense this, or you look like you are ready to kill somebody, and I think it's me. They're going to be clutching. You're going to notice these things. Because what you've done is you've slowed down enough to look with your eyes and to look even with your ears to listen to what's going on. And as a listener, we don't like the answer to this, but we need to ask, when you think they are done, you need to ask, is there more? Please, Lord, no. And for some of us, when we first enter into this, it is a painful experience. When you need to enter this in with your adult children that you haven't for years, it is painful. You're going to be sweating, cold sweats. You're going to be hopefully texting some of you will, calling your life group and saying, hey, I'm about to talk with my kids about this. Because you've just never done it before. Because why? Because somewhere in your past, we've thought if we just keep it under the iceberg, we'll never have to deal with it, and we love Jesus, so life is good. And you get to the point where you've got to look under that iceberg and figure out why are some things happening. And then the sixth thing is, when they are done, out of everything you've shared, what's the most important? Because that's just going to help you as a listener to zero in on whatever their concern was, versus if they've dump load everything on you. So what is most important? And then we just need to validate. I need to be able to, even as a parent of a 24-year-old, be able to say, ooh, I see how you could feel that, dear. I'm sorry. I need to be able to say, oh, I can understand that. I still want her to tell me when she's going on dates. But I can understand how she feels that's a little controlling. How she feels if the guy knows that dad knows that she's on this date, what's the guy going to, so I can understand the uncomfortableness with that. But I say, someone needs to know you're out with this guy and who he is and a cell phone number just in case things go bad. That's my issue. And for her to say, yes, Dad, I understand. She may not do anything about it, but at least she heard me. And so then that's the whole point of this, is to be heard. And it doesn't mean you're going to be able to solve the world's problems. You're not going to be able to change your personality, but you're going to be aware of the triggering points, of the buttons that you're pushing or that you have pushed for 10 or 15 years that finally have come up because you simply sat down and actually listened. And it will change your marriage. It'll change your employee relationships. It'll change your friendships the more we listen. And I think that is how we love as Jesus loves. That is how we love, as Paul has told us, to have that same mind, to enter in. It doesn't mean everything is going to be smoothed out or that we will never have a disagreement. But hopefully then you have the tools to be able to process those disagreements in a healthy and really a biblical way. People, this is what helps us to live out to our neighbors. A new commandment that I give to you, that you love one another as I have loved you. People, if I'm convinced, again, have your pretend cell phone out here and hit the button to show us on the chart that we do not love each other enough here. Oh, we want to. And the more we do it, you know what? The better our witness is out there. Because the world will see us. And they're going to know, yes, this church that's changing their color loves Jesus. This church has been around for 80-some years. They're serious about this. It isn't just a religion. It isn't just that they go to church every Sunday or whatever days they may think people go to a church. But this person of Jesus really is real, because look how they love one another. And again, you'll be amazed at how many people have never had a meal brought to them when they're sick. How many people have never received a call or a prayer when everything's hitting the fan at the office. We take that for granted. Those on the outside don't. And so really by our love, it starts here. It starts here with admitting, yes, we are created in the image of God. We are the light of the world. To point them to Jesus. And the more we are in love, the more we love each other in ways that Jesus wants us to, the better our witness is going to be. And the better we are going to be able to be new life for the city. Let me pray. Again, Lord, for your presence here, thank you. For the reminder of your love, thank you. And forgive us, God, for taking that for granted. Forgive us, God, for just thinking, we've known each other for years here. Forgive us for forgetting the reality that by our love, the world will know who you are. And so I just pray that you'll help